Jonas was a 42-year-old man, tall, with broad shoulders and eyes that had always been bright and determined. Born and raised in a small town, he had built a stable and comfortable life. After years of hard work, he'd managed to establish his own graphic design business. For him, the future seemed secure and promising. However, life has unexpected ways of surprising us, and one of these surprises happened on a rainy night in September. Jonas was driving home after a long day of work. The rain turned the asphalt into a dense reflective mirror, making visibility difficult. He was cautious, but he couldn't avoid the disaster that was about to happen. On a curve, another car skidded across the lane, crashing head-on into his. The collision was devastating. Jonas lost consciousness and woke up days later in a hospital bed. When he opened his eyes, he could barely move. A sense of terror overwhelmed him every time he remembered the impact. The deafening sound of crumpled metal, and the smell of fuel, and the shattered glass everywhere. Although his physical injuries were painful, doctors assured him he would recover over time. However, what no one could foresee was the emotional trauma that would follow. Jonas was alive, but something inside him had changed. Days after the accident, he began to experience inexplicable fear. Any loud sound made his heart race. Even the simple act of stepping outside seemed terrifying. The slightest sound of traffic made him tremble. At first, he thought it was just a temporary reaction to the accident's trauma. But as the weeks went by, Jonas realized that something deeper was happening. His confidence and security had disappeared. Before, he was a fearless and self-assured man. Now, every situation felt loaded with imminent danger. The sensation of suffocation grew with every attempt to leave home, and soon he completely isolated himself, leaving his company in the hands of his partners. It was then, in a medical consultation, that Jonas received his diagnosis. He was suffering from panic disorder, a psychological condition triggered by the trauma of the accident. Panic disorder is an intense and constant manifestation of anxiety that causes panic attacks, moments of extreme fear and physical and emotional disarray. For Jonas, the attacks came without warning, bringing an overwhelming feeling of impending death, as if each new crisis was a return to the moment of the crash. Accepting the diagnosis was difficult. Jonas was the kind of person who had always believed he could control his own emotions, viewing mental health as a matter of willpower. But now he found himself a prisoner of an irrational fear that appeared without reason and completely paralyzed him. In his mind, the world had become a threatening place, full of invisible traps and dangers. With the support of close family and friends, Jonas decided to seek professional help. He began a process of psychotherapy with a therapist experienced in trauma and anxiety disorders. Initially, the sessions were difficult. He felt ashamed to admit his fears, but little by little, he came to understand that panic disorder was not a sign of weakness. It was his body and mind's response to the deep shock he had suffered. During the treatment, the therapist introduced breathing and relaxation techniques to help him control the physical symptoms of panic. She also introduced him to the concept of gradual exposure, encouraging him to face his fears in a controlled way. Small challenges were introduced: going out for a walk around the neighborhood, having coffee at a nearby cafe. Each a small victory was an accomplishment and a reaffirmation that he could gradually regain control of his life. However, the attacks were still intense, and on some occasions made him want to give up. One time during a visit to the city centre, Jonas was hit by a wave of panic so strong that he had to stop and sit on a sidewalk bench, breathing with difficulty as the world around him seemed to spin. He felt shame and immense sadness, but his therapist reinforced that these moments were part of the process, and that each attack overcome was proof of his strength. Gradually, Jonas began to rebuild his life. He returned to work, initially just a few hours a day. Resuming professional activities helped restore his confidence. His colleagues, once so distant, now formed a support network, offering understanding and encouragement. Jonas also began to speak openly about what he was going through, realizing that many others had experienced similar situations.
6 months after starting treatment, Jonas felt stronger. He still had panic attacks, but now he could face them with greater calm. He discovered that he could take deep breaths, ground himself in the present, and wait for the crisis to pass, knowing it would not completely consume him. Panic disorder was still part of his life, but he had learned to cope with it, to recognize it as an echo of trauma rather than a real threat. This journey of resilience changed him profoundly. Jonas began to see life with fresh eyes, valuing small moments and close relationships. He understood that everyone faces their own internal battles, and that vulnerability is part of what makes us human. The man who had once been held hostage by fear was now rediscovering the courage to live. Jonas knew he would never forget what happened on that rainy night, but he realized he could move forward, using his trauma as a driving force to help others. He began speaking in lectures about panic disorder and the importance of mental health care, reaching people who, like him, felt trapped by fear and hopeless. In every conversation, he repeated a phrase that had become his mantra: courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. Jonas still faced panic, but he now knew that with resilience and support, it was possible to turn pain into powerful strength.